Cravings, constantly just feeling tremendously full of air and full of food and just, nothing was moving.
Her problem was a biochemical problem.
I didn't want anybody to know I had a problem. I started to feel scared that I was really harming my health in some way. I just felt I might die.
Welcome to The Incurables. I'm Don Wildman. Heather Fournier seemed to have it all. A great family, a successful career, a happy home life. Outwardly, she was in complete control. But Heather harbored a deep secret. The woman who could always handle anything silently battled a dangerous eating disorder. It was the one thing in her life she couldn't control, her potentially fatal flaw. Heather figured that the problem was the result of her drive to be perfect in all things. But that was just part of the story. There was something else inside her that was causing Heather to push her body to the very edge. And it would take nearly 20 years to discover what it was.
The desire to please started early for Heather. Growing up on the East Coast, she and her sister enjoyed a relatively normal childhood, but eventually they took different paths.
I thought I had a pretty happy childhood. I had a sister who was a bit of a troublemaker, and so I tried to be extra good to make up for that. And I think that's where sort of some of the perfectionism started.
Someone asked me once if she was type A, and they were joking, and I said, she's type AA. She sets very high standards daily for life and everyone that surrounds her.
I remember just feeling like I better be the one that my parents are going to be proud of, and I better be the good one.
Heather had a self-imposed pressure to shine. Even at her very young age, Heather felt something was definitely not right inside.
I would feel as if I had food sitting in my stomach for days. It never seemed to be digesting, and I didn't feel well. I often felt like I was bloated. My mother took me to a couple of doctors, and all they really did was give me fiber pills. They didn't really understand, it seemed, what was going on.
The uncertainty of her condition caused even more concern for Heather and her family. But there was more to the story that the young girl wouldn't reveal even to her mother.
I seemed to have uncontrollable cravings. I could sit down with a bowl of cereal, and instead of just having one bowl, I'd want to have the whole box. It seemed like my appetite would just never stop. There was a whole pint of Haagen-Dazs in the freezer. So I got it out thinking I'm just going to have one bite. I didn't even get a bowl out, and I finished the whole pint. I didn't feel that great. And having heard about bulimia, I thought, well, let me try it. So I went and experimented. There was nobody home at the time, and it seemed easy. It just seemed like an easy way to not have to hold on to the calories.
Heather's bulimic episodes were never planned, but they did become more frequent.
After about the third or fourth time, I was feeling a little concerned and thinking, this just doesn't feel right. Something's wrong here.
As she excelled throughout her teenage years, both socially and academically, Heather was able to control the bulimia, but the discomfort that came with digestion increased.
It was 6 months into my freshman year, and I was feeling distressed because I still had a lot of cravings, and I would try to plan my meals so that I wouldn't overeat. And at the same time, I was feeling a lot of digestive distress. I decided that I was going to plan a binge. And I actually went out and looked at the vending machines, picked a couple of candy bars, and I felt embarrassed even buying them because college, everybody's trying to be thin, or it seemed that way to me, and everybody's very image conscious, and I was too. And I ate the candy bars in the bathroom and threw them up, and I think the whole thing might have taken 20 minutes and went back up to my dorm room. In the past, I never planned it. It was just kind of doing it to compensate for eating too much. This was an actually planned episode.
After that first deliberate episode, the planned binges and purges seemed to become easier for Heather. In fact, she often endured the vicious pattern 3 times a week, overeating in silence, experiencing great stomach pain, and then sneaking into the bathroom to relieve her agony. The cycle began to affect her health.
I remember waking up and feeling like I was having a heart attack and calling my friend and saying, I feel like I'm having a heart attack. I was really short of breath. I had pain down my left arm. I was scared. And I called the infirmary and I asked them, I told them what I was feeling, and they said, well, that's probably just take some deep breaths, and they figured I was probably panicking because I had a test or something like that. So I never went into the doctor. But I remember that being sort of a jolt for me, that I wonder if that's because of throwing up. I started to feel scared that I was really harming my health in some way. So I called my parents, and they were really upset. They were upset partially because there were some people around the corner from them whose daughter had anorexia, and she was having a lot of trouble collapsing in the street, having to be carried home, and like near-death kind of trouble. And so this is what my parents knew about eating disorders, and that I was going to die.
Heather's bulimia was out of control. Her parents were so concerned that they brought her home from college and took her to counseling. Although she never felt that the therapy was really helping her, Heather continued with the sessions in part to please her parents.
The thing that I remember during those few weeks and after that was how depressed I felt, because it was like we were focusing on this big problem that I had, and everybody was upset about it, and I felt like a burden to my parents. It felt very reactive to me. It was just this feeling of being really depressed because I was focused on this insurmountable problem.
Bulimia is very difficult to overcome. I think it's as difficult to overcome as anorexia. It's very easy to do. It's a kind of a closet behavior. You eat and everybody thinks you've eaten a normal meal, and then you go in the bathroom and you either make yourself vomit, or you go home and you take a bunch of laxatives and get diarrhea and get everything out of your system before you can really absorb all your nutrients. But it's often undetected, and that makes it harder for somebody to admit to, and then harder to treat.
Between the end of my sophomore year and into my junior year, I stopped for a year, and while I stopped throwing up, I did not stop binging, so I was constantly feeling like I wanted to eat and eat. And I did start to gain weight.
The few extra pounds Heather had gained were making it more difficult to battle her disease.
I remember I had these skinny jeans. I probably had 3 or 4 pairs, and I never threw them away, and I would always try them on to see if they fit, and I decided that I was going to fit into those jeans.
That meant Heather would start purging again, which she did throughout the rest of her time in college.
It just became a part of my life. I still went to classes. I still got good grades. I went out with all my friends. I mean, I had a really great time with people, so it just seemed like I could fit this nice and neatly into my life without disrupting anything else.
Her denial was complete. Heather finished college, got a great job, and met the man of her dreams.
We just really hit it off. He told me he loved me that first weekend, and I thought, that seems a little quick.
I knew that Heather was the right person almost immediately. She has a wonderful attitude and approach to life. She's very upbeat, and I just really, her energy is really infectious.
As soon as I got home, I had a dozen long-stem roses waiting, saying, "I can't stop thinking about you."
The couple married just 4 months after they had met, but Heather had yet to reveal her shameful secret to her new husband.
I didn't feel like he needed to know about me having bulimia, so I didn't tell him.
She struggled for so many years with long bouts of indigestion problems and all the unpleasantness that goes along with it.
When we did start living together, I had to find ways to conceal my behavior from him, and that's when things got a little more tricky.
Heather's long-standing problems with digestion made excellent cover for her tragic bulimic condition.
I just sort of passed it off, and he probably didn't want to intrude, but he was a little bit suspicious, but he didn't seem suspicious to me, so I just let it go.
Her behavior made sense to me based on the problems that she was describing to me. If someone has problems with food and it's a digestive nightmare, no matter what you eat, it would make sense that you would spend a lot of time in the bathroom.
Heather tried to conceal the violent sounds of her retching by running the bath water.
I mean, I had a suspicion something was amiss, but Heather's digestive problems that I was aware of were a perfect mask for the bulimic behavior.
Heather was able to live her lies successfully as her marriage and career blossomed. But as the months and years went on, digestion never improved and her health became more of a concern.
There were times that I would feel exhausted and like there must be something wrong with me and maybe I'm really starting to do damage. And finally, I got to a point where I really wanted to make a change.
Heather's bulimia was threatening to take over her life. She had tried everything she could think of to overcome the disease, but she was losing. In desperation, she made an appointment with a natural practitioner who was an addiction specialist.
What she said to me was eating disorders are very difficult for her to treat. Drugs and alcohol, cigarettes, those are different because you can abstain from those, but you can't abstain from food. So she couldn't say, you will now not eat. She had to pick something, so we picked sugar, which was my big trigger. She gave me a list of foods that I was supposed to eat or not eat, and some supplements and some tinctures. And I started following everything to the letter. For a year and a half, I was free of bulimia. I actually felt like the monster of addiction was gone. I felt so much more open to the miracle of life, really. But I still had the digestive pain, and I still binged. Rhonda told me that I needed to leave my job, and I knew she was right, but I stayed. I stayed because I was afraid of the finances. I was afraid it was more for financial security than anything else. At some point, the stress and the over-exercising and all of the work that I was doing just was an overload, and the digestive distress on top of it. So I had a relapse, and it was pretty bad. It just seemed like it came back with a vengeance.
Heather needed to find someone or some way to escape this vicious cycle. She hired a life coach to try and get her problems under control. A feeling of hopelessness was settling in.
I felt like a failure. I felt like this was going to be my life, and I wanted more than that.
Outwardly, Heather's life was completely together. To reveal this deep secret to anyone, especially to the man she loved, meant risking it all.
I was afraid to tell my husband because I thought that he would feel like there was something wrong with me. He would be disappointed that he married me. He thought I had a great appetite and I was fun and I, didn't have any of these problems, and I thought it was going to be like a whole different person that he didn't really know.
Bulimia, I think, if you really were to look at it, might be more common than anorexia. It just doesn't get as much attention because people with bulimia don't often end up as thin overall as some of the young girls and young women with anorexia. But it's exceedingly difficult to overcome.
What little I did know was associated with kind of the pictures, the poster child pictures of Karen Carpenter, et cetera, that you saw growing up, and that you think of that person and struggling with this disease, and that's not what Heather looked like.
I kept trying to find the right time, and over a period of about a week to a week and a half, the right time didn't seem to come. But one day we were going for a walk, and we were in this wildlife park, and nobody else was around. We
were walking along, and she told me she wanted to confide in me something that she'd been keeping from me for a long time.
And my husband said something like, well, I always did suspect that maybe you were throwing up. And I paused for a minute, and I said I was.
She was very upset, and she told me her story, that she had been battling with bulimia for years.
And he actually stopped and hugged me, and he said, it must feel good to get rid of that secret. And we just stayed and hugged for about 10 minutes. That was the last thing I expected his reaction to be. I thought that he was going to be upset or have a whole, be horrified or disgusted or something. And the last thing I expected was for him to have that kind of supportive reaction. And I couldn't believe that I had waited so long to tell him.
Heather decided that her addiction specialist had been right about quitting her high-stress job and simplifying her life. Perhaps that was the road to recovery from this insidious disease. She and Joel packed their belongings and moved to the tiny Caribbean island of Saba.
Moving to Saba was like living my life's dream, and I was in this place. I had accomplished my vision. I was living the way I wanted to live, and yet my life wasn't going the way I wanted it to. After I admitted to my husband that I had bulimia, I stopped binging and purging for about 3 weeks. And every time I was in this period of recovery after I had seen Rhonda, I would start eating the food again that she had recommended. And it was almost like I flipped a switch. For 3 weeks, everything was great. But then I'd get to a point where my digestion's pulling me back.
Part of what was causing Heather's abdominal discomfort was lack of some essential nutrients that she was not getting in her diet just because she wasn't eating those foods, and those would have been things like the omega-3 oils.
Heather had previously picked up the Body Ecology diet book to borrow a few recipes. She decided to research it further as a way to address her digestive issues.
The diet is a grouping of 7 different foods. It's extremely complete. There's nothing missing. Unlike other diets out there that maybe argue that high protein is best, or high carb, low protein, vegetarian, vegan, you can do it all on Body Ecology. What we specialize in is fermented foods, and that's what's missing in every other diet out there. And yet the fermented foods are loaded with beneficial bacteria. When you eat them, they bring these good bacteria to live inside of you, helping you create this inner ecosystem.
I went back to the book and said, well, look, Donna Gates talks about eating these things and why it's important to eat it, and maybe I need to look at this and follow this a little bit more.
The bottom line, it really is about the quality of what we eat. And the Body Ecology diet is based on sound scientific principles, sound principles on how to culture foods that have been around for thousands of years, focusing on the organic quality of the food, and also focusing on how to combine the food.
People think that they're sick, and they're not. Their body's just undernourished, it has infections, digestion is poor, and they don't have energy. And that's exactly what we're addressing with the diet.
Heather was also diagnosed with a yeast imbalance condition called Candida.
When Heather was diagnosed with Candida, and she also did have some abnormal bacteria in her intestine, my assumption is that that was a large part of what was causing a lot of her abdominal discomfort, her feeling that she couldn't digest her food, a lot of her pain, and would probably also result in some of her bulimic behavior, because she would eat to try to quiet down the discomfort and then feel that she shouldn't have all that food in her, and then she would do something to purge.
Through the Body Ecology, Heather also learned that sugar, the food which her addiction specialist had called her trigger, was also a source of the problem.
If we put the wrong food in, particularly processed, simple foods like bread, pasta, cereal, and sugar-containing foods or sugar itself, that we create an environment in our intestinal ecology where the wrong bacteria grow too fast, the fungi grow too fast, particularly the Candida albicans as well as the other Candida species. They thrive on a high sugar diet.
One of the sort of pillars of change that Heather incorporated into her life was the conscious eating and food preparation.
The very first meal that I had on Body Ecology, I didn't have any digestive pain anymore.
A large part of that was the incorporation of sour foods, which are the cornerstone of the Body Ecology diet, and that's been extremely helpful in maintaining good digestion for her.
It was like everything came into place for me, and I never threw up again.
For a year on the Body Ecology diet, Heather not only feels great, she's lost all desire to binge and purge. Finally, she's been able to extend her confidence in everyday life to her eating habits.
The hardest thing I thought for me was going to be knowing when to stop eating. And even after I saw Rhonda, I didn't know when to stop eating. I kept saying, I don't have the shut-off valve. And there's all kinds of studies that talk about, people with bulimia missing certain chemicals that make it hard for them to stop. Well, with Body Ecology, I could have a meal and stop eating, which was a miracle to me. My husband's got candy and ice cream and cookies and all kinds of things, and I never feel like I want them. I think even after I saw Rhonda, there was still a thread that was holding me to that bulimic person. And it was almost like if I walked a little bit too far in one direction, I would be over the edge. Whereas now, I don't feel like there is that edge anymore. I feel like that person is completely gone. I feel so stable and strong and grounded. And it's a feeling unlike anything I've ever had before. I finally decided that healing was more important than money and that I needed to just take the leap. So I decided to get my certification as a professional coach. And because I was someone who fast-tracked in my career and did very well in my career, and also didn't have much of a life, I wanted to work with people who were high performers in the corporate environment and who wanted to have more meaning in their life. And I realized that there was a formula for success that didn't include, you know, working so hard that you didn't have anything else to look forward to. At 37, I feel like I'm living a wonderful life. I'm living the life that I choose, you know, with the work that I love to do, and really paying attention to getting everything I can out of my life.
We're, you know, looking forward to the future. It's been a great life so far, but just getting better and better.
With the overwhelming support of her husband and by following the principles of the body ecology diet, Heather finally felt comfortable both inside and out. It's no coincidence that once she gained control over her digestive disorders and her bulimia, Heather was able to take a step back and realize that there was more to life than being successful, like being happy.